Welcome back. The first session was nice and relaxed. There was no friction. There was no warmth, as Brian Gilbertson would say. No friction, no warmth. So we could up our game a little bit and get a bit more in the face of each other. Is that a fair request? Let's just say things the way they really are. Tell us what you really think. Why don't we take a few minutes of their time, because we clearly gave them too much time, with a quick Slido question to wake everybody up. Online people, you know how to do this. So can we do a quick Slido check-in with this audience? What is the biggest obstacle to a successful just energy transition in South Africa? Lack of funding, poor coordination, insufficient skills development, political resistance, or ideological division? You can try that, but you're going to break Slido, so good luck with that. You have to choose, eh? We've got 30 people awake. The rest are still in a coffee queue. And I have to say, this coffee is worth queuing for. Brian, there's nothing I can do to wake up the audience. But to the extent that the 50 people is a representative sample of our audience, I think most of the people would have wanted to vote all of the above and a few other issues, of course. Over to you and your panel. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Day, and we have an esteemed panel. I really am overawed, so thank you very much. There are two key words for me in the heading for our panel: path and progress. We've heard a lot this morning about the past, going back right to 1923 when Hendrik van der Bijl set up Eskom and the Afrikaners, etc. Good as that was, we are now looking forward. So I have James Mackay, I have Alex McNamara, who is online.
He said to me he's Mackay, so I'm just telling you he's Mackay.
He's
like
Mackay. Okay, I stand corrected. You want a feisty debate, so I can't argue with that because it's James's call. I have Shamini Harrington, I have Nikki Fisher, and Joanne Yawitch. Some of the key issues is, where do we stand with the coal resurgence? What's government's view, and do we have a roadmap? What's the role of gas and nuclear in the transition? What does the energy mix look like? And what about looking regionally into Southern Africa? So what we will do is have introductory remarks starting from right to left. So James, you were listed first on the program, so we'll go with you. And over to you, and then we'll have the debate. And we've specifically been asked to be a little bit more feisty than this morning's was. I'm quite happy with that, and I'm sure the panel is. James.
Good, okay. Well, it's excellent to be here. Afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Bernard. So if we just get kind of straight into it, I think that we have to first put into context we've been in a period of rapid change. If we take from 23, where I think we all understand the crisis that we're in. Initially, that went really quickly. Where we are now is we've in a real stall sort of environment. So we had a lot of structural shift. We then saw legislation, the ERA, and a lot of policy amendments coming in, a lot of frameworks, a lot of direction. Implementation is very, very lacking and is starting to decline. So I'm less positive than I was sort of 6 months ago. I think the three biggest things that we have to focus on is we've got to rapidly expand grid. We've got to work out how to accelerate TDP, create more sort of transparency around the structure of TDP and the link to private sector development. 2, we've got to launch the market. The market is critical to addressing a lot of the cross-subsidizations, risk transfer, and tariff issues that are being spoken about. It creates price discovery and it creates efficiency discovery. And 3, we've got to address public sector capacity, particularly the department, which is brand new, and the regulator. Both of these are desperately needed, must be fit for purpose, and currently they're not. So I think we've got to address those 3. Everything else will start to flow from those, but those 3 issues, I think, are fundamental. And let me lastly just say, Brian, in a 1% GDP growth environment, we can't afford our policy ambitions that have been kind of grandly stated. We've got to find a pathway for the government where we believe a 3% plus GDP environment is possible. If we can't get into that space, we can't afford this level of investment at a 1% environment. That's just not possible. That's what would be my views. Thanks.
Thanks very much, James. Nikki.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I think absolutely we have made a lot of progress in the last few years. I think looking forwards as well, the change is not a switch, it's a shift, it's a progression. And I think that the rhetoric around it being an either-or solution is, we need to do away with it. We're going to need more of everything. It needs to be, we need to maintain energy security. There's a lot of investment that's going to be required for that. We need to make sure the energy-intensive users, the AI centers, etc., have stable power. We also need to make sure that we can afford it. I think we've seen in Europe what's happened there in terms of their affordability of electricity. And then I think first and foremost, we need to put the coal-dependent communities at the center of the transition. It's going to take a lot of planning. It's going to take a lot of investment in reskilling, in rehabilitation, in trying to diversify the economies of those regions. And that's really where all of the pieces come together. And the energy transition is one aspect, but then the transition of the people is another. And I think South Africa has a big opportunity in terms of export coal. We still have coal, we can export it, it's a great revenue stream. And we shouldn't be looking to shut down coal mines purely because they're coal.
Thank you, Nikki. Shamini.
So good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. I think from my side, I'm very much on James' page as well. We've done a lot over the last few years. We've got the Climate Change Act. We've set up the PCC. We've had the Just Energy Transition Partnership. We've done a lot in the space of electricity, renewables deployment. But if we look at the future, that is definitely changing. We are kind of at a crossroads, and we can either choose the high road or we can choose the low road, or we can go completely backwards. And I think we need to be able to take stock of where we are as a country. You're quite right, James, 1% not acceptable, but I think we also need to be aware that with the load shedding, what we came out of COVID and all of that, industry has never been able to get back to the point that they need to be at, and you need a foundation business in order to transition. If you want progress and you want greater progress, you need to sort out your backyard. And I think we are forgetting that through load shedding, we've lost beneficiation capability. That's gone to China. We are losing the opportunity to make low carbon products that the minerals are extracted from here. And it's taken elsewhere to make other value chains and localize and benefit another country. So we've got to really look long and hard about what we are doing in this country to change that paradigm. I really think we need to start looking at a common vision. I think we've become too fragmented. I think the discussions are too polarized, and we need to find each other again to be able to say, what is the policy we need to enable the change we need? And we need to start taking a value chain perspective, or looking at where the opportunities lie across the value chain. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Shamini. Joanne.
Thanks, and morning, everybody. I wouldn't disagree with much of what has been said. I think that in South Africa we have had a long period of progress. I think we are at a turning point. I think that with the ERA Act and with the work that's being done around the grid, we are at a point where either that can accelerate processes, and if we don't move fast enough and with sufficient clarity, it will set us back. I do think, though, that we need to, and you mentioned the words path and trajectory, Brian, in your introduction, and I do think that it is really important to be able to talk about things like timescales, industrial policy, and cost. And I think that this debate about what is the future of coal, not only locally but globally, has to be located in that kind of context. So let me give you a few global examples of where some of that debate is happening. If you look at India, a week ago announced that they had reached 50% of their installed capacity is now renewables. So they've reached their nationally determined contribution target for renewable capacity 5 years ahead of time, and they are now talking about how they're going to ramp that up over the next decade or so. So very, very big shifts in global and emerging economies that obviously have an impact on how diversified an energy system is and over what period of time, and with considerable clarity. If you look at the fact that there's overcapacity in China at the moment in relation to renewable infrastructure production, countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan are buying up that infrastructure because it is cheap at the moment in very large quantities in order to be able to then set up very large utility scale infrastructure that they're going to use going forward. And that's what I mean by the kind of industrial policy debate, the trajectory debate, and I think that the question of how long then does coal have a future and for what becomes a very important question. So I do believe that in South Africa for at least the next 20, 30 years, maybe a bit longer, we are going to be using coal. The question is going to be what for, at what cost, and how are we going to locate coal within the context of a much more diversified energy mix. And I really hope we can have that conversation, because it is not one energy source versus another, or one source of primary fuel versus another. It is how does this all fit together, and how do we be able to work with the complexity of that in order to arrive at the best solution for the country, the best solution for the climate, the most affordable solution for the country, and the one that is best for our people. So I think those are questions that there's not necessarily one answer to them. They're not necessarily all aligned with each other, but those are the questions that we've got to ask to arrive at, I suppose, a coherent approach to where we are going as a country.
Thanks very much, Joanne. Alex McNamara is online. Alex, I realize that you were planning to be here. There's some flight challenges at the moment, so you're online as a result. So let's then give you the floor for your introduction.
Thanks so much, Brian. Yes, so I mean, for me, I think I agree with what's been said, but I also think the advancement of the power sector is a critical priority, as already mentioned. And I do think that the ramp up of renewable energy in a consistent way is a key thrust of that. So I completely agree about the wholesale market, about the transmission plan, all of that is critical, but it's an enabler for achieving a renewable energy scaling up that we haven't seen today, which is absolutely essential for energy security, for economic competitiveness, and also for affordable electricity at the same time. So for me, it's also about, if we're going to avoid future load shedding, which we absolutely have to do, we need to ramp up renewables as a way to the fastest deployment we can actually achieve. That's going to be the volume we need. It's going to be the opportunity we need. And if we can get the consistent build rates, we can actually start to see local assembly, local manufacture. I really like what was said about having bid windows that are more, we're looking further into the future, because we know that if we have a consistent plan and a strong policy signal, we can really start to get original equipment manufacturers building locally and start to diversify our economy and grow the renewable energy sector in a way that also is positive for things, not just about concerns about job losses in certain other sectors. So I would put that at the heart of the whole conversation. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks very much. So let's go to the interesting part, I think, of the conversation this morning. I would suggest that something like half of the just transition is about building renewables. The important part of that statement is the other half is not about building renewables. It's far vaster than just renewables and just Mpumalanga, as crucial as Mpumalanga is because of the localization of the impacts of the transition. Within that context, I see that the build-out rate of renewables in the country has been dastardly slow for a lot of reasons. James, first question to you. You spoke about capital availability in the country, not just for the renewables build, but the grid that enables renewables, because now it's distributed, it's built in different places than it was built before. It's a massive challenge. Can you delve into that a little bit? We've had 10 years plus of 1% growth rate. We've had population growth that exceeds that. We're in a dire situation as a country in terms of poverty and inequality. But talk to us about capital available in the system of the country.
There's always plenty of capital if we look globally. So that's always the first thing. There's not a problem of available capital. It's the ability to spend capital well. The only reason why I accepted the invite to come here, Bernard, was because I knew there was a BS meter. I remember from last year, and I said, no, I've definitely got to be where the BS meter is. So we've got to move on from talking about the trilemma and now the quadrilemma in these general strategic terms, because we've actually passed that point. We have the legislation, the policy. If we want to be very crystal clear, and there's a lot of, even the reference case in the IRP says the same. Basically, we've got to spend in the next 10 years roughly 2 trillion rand on new investment in new equipment in energy. That is roughly 1.3 trillion on wind, solar, batteries and gas, 400 billion on transmission, 300 billion on distribution, give or take. We still haven't decommissioned anything, digitized anything, restructured anything. We haven't done any capital raising. Okay, so in a 1% world, how will we afford that? In a 3% plus world, I think suddenly we say, well, maybe we can move on that. And then who moves? Because ultimately, the entire energy system has got to come down to really two end games. One, the consumer pays. Two, the taxpayer pays. So we've got to decide who and how is going to pay for this. And all these energy practitioners, myself included, as we sit there and say, we have to do this and have to do that. How is that going to be paid for by the consumer? Because someone's got to pay. It's a zero-sum game. And the last thing I'd say around affordability is Eskom is fundamental to this whole next 20 years, okay? At least, probably a lot longer than that. There are three key things that are driving affordability. One is there's efficiency. That's Eskom should deliver that and they should be held to account to do that. Two, there's municipal debt. Eskom can't solve that. Three, there is massive legacy and structural debt problems with Eskom, and also Eskom can't solve that. So those are political will issues, those are government issues, those are national problems. Now, I think once we can start solving those issues, then we'll say, okay, well, we now know how to fund it, and actually, well, then there's going to be plenty of money, as we see from donor groups, international investment finance, and just equity interest in South Africa. Lastly, I mean, I think two big banks have said this. Currently, business is sitting on the highest record cash flow levels in the bank, but don't have the business confidence to deploy into our own economy. So let's solve those things and get very real about what needs to be spent. But the targets, I think, is quite clear. That's not very difficult to work out. Thanks.
Thank you very much, James. Nikki, you spoke about the people, the economy. Talk to us more about the people aspect. Coal company, there's a certain life. That life, some people might say that's 2 years, some people might say 20 years, some people might say 200 years. But there is certainly some sort of ramp down. And you've got these people. These are people with families. They're people with aspirations, skill sets. Somebody mentioned this morning, I think it was Silas, giving a professional the opportunity to go and plant a market garden, if they're not retiring or doing their garden on the weekend because that's their first love, it's frankly offensive. Talk to us more about the people element of this.
Thanks, Brian. I think you're 100% right. And I think, in the Mpumalanga region, coal is a finite resource. It's not going to last forever. So regardless of the transition, there's mines that are going to be closing in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years. So, while there might be a future for coal for 15 to 20 years, we're going to be facing these problems. And I think we need to reframe how we're looking at this and reframe how we look at mine closure, be more strategic about it so that we can use that mine closure process to bring those communities in, to do the reskilling of our own workforce, and to start developing sort of industrial complexes in that area. It can't be orange farming or hemp farming. Those things are part of a solution, but they're not the solution. And as you say, it is offensive to ask somebody who's an engineer to go and garden or pick oranges. It is offensive. So we need to start being more strategic about how we allocate our resources from CSI, SLPs, allocating those towards proper reskilling for the green economy, proper industrialization projects, looking at circular economy projects, and I think if I had a penny for every time we need to say, where we say that the mining companies need to collaborate because economies of scale, I'd be a rich woman. But that's what needs to happen. We need to look at mine closure as an opportunity. We have water, the water gets treated, we have land. How do we use that and repurpose that so that we can actually diversify those economies?
Great, thank you very much. Shamini, one of the statements you made was about value chain. There's a reality of value chain in the existing industries and in the emerging industries. Well, not really emerging anymore.
The low carbon future.
The low carbon industries that have been through stop-starts, and it's something that Alex referred to around a predictable, defined procurement program, for example. And I want to come back to the wholesale market just now because that's potentially going to not just augment, but to some extent replace some elements of REAP before. But talk to us something about the value chain that you're exposed to and the criticality and the opportunities to look beyond just developing and building an RE project into all of the other manufacturing sectors that result not just in that value chain, but in associated value chains.
Good question, Brian, and I think it's such an important one that us, as the mining sector, I represent the Minerals Council, which is all of mining, is that we are starting to think about is how do you look at the mining sector as the start of these very important value chains into the future? What do we have to do differently? And I mean, as we know, the mining sector right now is in a decline. We've had 2 quarters with very poor performance, some of which had to do with weather, mind you, related to climate change that we're experiencing. But I think it's important now that we sit back and we reflect on, okay, so what's causing this and how do we make a fundamental shift? And when we look at the sector, there are a number of challenges that the sector itself is facing that one needs to understand. We've got policy constraints. We've got things in terms of taxes coming our way, environmental issues. We've got a whole framework in terms of illegal mining and challenges around that. We've got crime, corruption, all of these things affecting the mining sector. And when we look at it, we sit back and we think, okay, how do we unlock this? So we come back to collaboration. We come back to looking at the sector as a whole. And as the Minerals Council, we represent the mining sector and the metal sector. So part of that is also beneficiation. And we need to start thinking about how do we get right the mining sector so it can provide that feedstock and that input into a value chain that then gets localized in the country to be able to create jobs and contribute to the economy. Right now, the mining sector contributes about 6%. We want that to be higher. How do we do more with what we have? And I think the important thing is starting to understand where do we work together. And I don't think we work together well enough. And I don't think we've tried to collaborate better on the areas where we can. SLPs, great example. I mean, I came into the Minerals Council, I'm fairly new, I came from Sasol. And I was landed with these SLPs, and I kept on thinking to myself, why aren't we collaborating more? Why don't we get together and look at large-scale projects that unlock water, for example, or unlock renewable energy that then becomes the input into a value chain for green hydrogen, for example, or into SAF, or into the PGM sector that allows for electric vehicles and batteries to be developed. But we don't sit and we don't think about the opportunities together. And I think as stakeholders generally in the country, we don't don't talk about these things. And I do believe there's a point where we have to start getting honest and sit down and say, okay, let's put our mandates aside and our different issues. How are we going to solve the problems the country is facing? And how do we do this together with government? Because we need to take everybody on this journey, including business. We can't be left behind. So I just wanted to say, for me, the most honest thing is we need to sit down and we need to start collaborating better.
I want to come back to that, also with some of Alex's comments, and link it to the implementation imperative that James mentioned. Because I think there's some great forums, but yes, the great South African failing is implementation versus planning.
Yeah.
But Joanne, you said a couple of absolutely crucial things. You spoke about timelines and knowing what reasonable timelines are. Because there was also a comment this morning that in the beginning, the Just Energy, I think it was you, let me take you on directly. In the beginning, and I may be wrong, in the beginning, the Just Energy transition was spoken about to close all the coal plants tomorrow. That is completely not my experience of the first day of hearing about the Just Energy transition from my perspective. I would suggest that that is a defensive view of people who could be impacted, so coal people, etc. My experience of a just transition has been profoundly a positive possibility. But until we get through the bulldust of where we agree and where we disagree, we actually don't know where we can actually fight the battle. I think it's a classic one of the GNU. They actually worked out that they actually agree on 90% plus of the stuff, and now they're working on the other 10%, instead of arguing like they do in Parliament about the 90%, and they do it vocally, and we want to fight with each other about it, but they're big buddies when the cameras go off. So timelines. What is a real practical timeline for the coal decommissioning? There's certain constraints of that, emissions, all of those things. In the context of something else you said, which is the complexity of the solutions. Because until and unless we build enough new capacity, any conversation around turning off coal is just absurd.
Yeah, irresponsible.
You know, it's not even a conversation.
Yeah.
But if we don't build renewables, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's also not okay, because then anyone who says that the transition's not real can be proven right by their own inaction in building the new. So you've got to build the new first and then have the conversation about that. But anyway, I don't want to answer my question. Timelines, complexities.
Okay, so I think that if we look at the domestic market for coal, it's going to be driven very fundamentally by two things. The first is by Eskom's closure plan, and there is going to be a closure plan, partly because Eskom has some very old power stations that are reaching end of both operational and economic life, and where the cost to both Eskom and the country of keeping them open is unwarranted. I mean, I really think that's where we are, and Eskom, I think, has taken a sober view of that. Eskom presented to Parliament recently, and I think it shows that there's been some very careful thought about what can be done. So I think that is the one issue. I think the issues around the export market are much more complex, but I do think that it's going to depend on what is going to be happening in the Asian economies around coal into the future. How are they going to diversify their energy mixes, and what does that mean then in relation not only to what we produce, but the cost of it, and the value of it to those economies. So I think those are the critical things that we've got to look at. Thirdly, I think we have to look at the issues around climate change and the issues around emissions and where we sit globally in relation to that, which is that we, together with most of the rest of the world, the vast majority of the rest of the world, have taken on particular carbon emission levels of reduction. By 2030, we're now looking at what we can or can't do by 2035. And that goes along with the implementation of the Climate Change Act, which is not only going to set sectoral emission targets, but is also going to set carbon budgets for big emitters. And I think the process around that is going to be the third leg of this, is how is that going to influence or going to determine what can be emitted, but also around how that gets spread across the economy. It's really about what do we believe is fair? How much carbon do we as South Africa believe we can fairly emit over the next 30 or 40 years in relation to what Botswana can emit, or what Egypt can emit, or what Chile is going to. And that debate will happen internationally, but it will have a profound impact on us. I think the last element of this is the financing element. And I mean, there have been references to it. It is not easy to finance fossil fuels at the moment. It is likely to become more difficult over time. There are complicated reasons for it. It's not just a climate issue. It is an issue also about productivity, efficiency, return on capital. And so, Brian, I think all of those things start to work together in complicated ways that we need to be having, as Shamini said, some honest conversations about. And I think there is room for radical collaboration around the solutions. Yeah. Not only, Shamini, in relation to the issues of what happens to the workforce in areas such as Mpumalanga, or the automotive workforce, for that example, for that case as well, who, if we don't act in an equally proactive way, stand to be decimated by a shift to electric vehicles, not only in South Africa, but globally. Yeah. So we've got to collaborate in a radical way and find collective solutions to all of these problems so that we end up with a world that is as good as we can make it. Thanks.
I think, Brian, just to add something to what Joanne said, I was struck by one of the conversations we were privy to. The Japanese government is looking at coal 2040 and beyond. So, just to what Joanne said, what's going on globally is quite important to understand. You said it as well, Nikki, in terms of us understanding the opportunity around export coal to be able to finance the transition in South Africa. And we've got to be able to think about these timelines in a way that looks at the transition as a journey. And how we get there needs to be open to the possibilities of using what we have in country to be able to get something that's more diversified into the future, recognizing we have a carbon budget. We cannot emit into perpetuity.
Thanks very much for coming in. I encourage the panel to do that more. We had a great discussion while we were getting mic'd up.
I know.
And we were like having this real discussion, and now, it's natural. We're a little bit stayed up on the front.
Don't worry, we recorded that conversation and we'll play it live afterwards.
Of course we will.
Het ek gevloek, ek hoop nie. Alex, I want to come to you with something that Shamini spoke about. SLP is a social and labour plan for those not in the mining industry. Economic development in the renewables REAP world. It's that associated benefit to communities, etc. In fact, Silas spoke about it. Silas didn't build the first wind farm. He's built one of the first wind farms at Cookhouse. We were going to use, with the company that I worked for at the time, the same turbine supplier with him, and because of problems, we couldn't anymore. So sorry, Silas, we still owe you one there. But he spoke about how much he could procure locally. Yes, it wasn't black enough yet, and that's all growing, and that's all good. But in the renewables program, apart from one of the biggest hurdles, and Alex spoke about it, the continuous, predictable procurement, and I want to come back later to what SAWEM will do in the wholesale market to this, and how potentially we have an industry charter like the mining charter, to make sure that we do the right things, economically viable but uplifting at the same time. So the collaboration, and I have the privilege of being in the IPP office at a time, they're very set rules. You've got to spend the right amount of money in the right quarter on a qualifying entity. That's what the lawyers put in the contract. Those are constraints, and they're about to design the same for the ITP. The transmission program. And the request for proposals includes the need for development economists in the team and measures of impact, which is a great advancement and critically important. But Alex, this is very much your world. How could we collaborate better between renewables projects that are close to each other, mining entities that are close to each other? You do this, I'll do that, we support each other.
Okay, well, I think there's two kind of areas we're trying to develop here, right? I mean, one is there's the rollout of renewables as almost like an independent issue and how we maximize on that for the economy as a whole. And then there's obviously how we deal with, areas where through natural electricity planning, coal-fired power stations are going to close over a certain lifespan. People need to have economic diversification and we need to have, social protection in place. And I think you're going to need slightly different strategies for each. On the renewable side, I can't help but feel that we have to have renewable energy as part of the pinnacle of our future green industrialization. And we look across the renewable energy value chain. So it's the upstream side, it's the assembly and manufacture, it's the downstream jobs, it's all the services jobs related to it, and making sure that investors know we have this consistent build rate. This is a place where you will want to actually lay manufacturing and assembly and recycling as well. So we think reuse and recycling is also a key part of that as well. As soon as you look at that renewable energy economy, it will include governmental stakeholders, local government. So we work a lot with local government thinking about their economic diversification strategies. How are they thinking about maximizing the green economy, the renewable energy economy, and also creating opportunities for a more just transition where SMEs in sort of downstream circular economy value chains can really play a significant role. It often we think could lend itself to more semi-skilled work opportunities as well. So we've got to absolutely maximize that completely. And then take, I suppose, quite a lot of that similar thinking through into the coal-based economy area, where you've got to also, if you don't have a sense that the public sector and the private sector agree, we need to have economic diversification, we need to create an enabling environment for investment wherever we can, and of course have demand-led skilling, so we're skilling people for where there's actual employment demand, we're not going to get very far. So I think what you need in that space is you need an independent intermediary that is trusted by both parties, so public sector and private sector, somebody who's a bit of an honest broker to say this is how we can create an enabling environment for investment within the public sector space, but also how we can attract businesses and how we can attract investment on the other side. And in the fulcrum of that, I think, is also you've got to be supporting the technical colleges. You've got to be supporting the skills market so that they are demand-led, that they have the innovation and the skills are coming up that will actually be needed for that future economy. So I would probably employ both those strategies simultaneously. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks very much, Alex. James, I'd like to come back to you with 2 5-letter acronyms, SAWEM and SAWRIM. South African Wholesale Energy Market and South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. You and Energy Council have been ardent at the launch of the wholesale market 1 April next year. Not moving, it's happening, and every time I see something on LinkedIn from James or Energy Council, it's there. Hold us accountable. I absolutely love it. But talk to it in the context of how that can be a lever for industrialization, building of a lot more renewables, not just through the REAP, but actually, because now there's a market, we're just doing business, but also how the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, recently approved by Cabinet, well, a number of months ago now, and how that can build out on the just part of the industrialization.
Thanks.
I need to check in. You know what 1st of April really is?
I didn't mention that on purpose.
So we'll laugh on the 1st of April, perhaps at you.
What do they say about who laughs last or who laughs loudest? I don't know. I'm going to, if I can take a little bit of liberty on context of why the market is important. And
Please.
Yeah, and I'm going to stick to my theme here around implementation, being very, very practical. So the global signals at a very high level is that we've moved away from climate ambition and is very focused on practical implementation. It's business case driven. And even here, a really interesting point, India is talking about a green discount. So they will only build renewables at a discount to fossil fuels. That said, they're building only second to China, and China builds more than the rest of the world put together every year. Okay, so we're seeing a narrative slowdown, but not actually an investment slowdown, but it's becoming a lot more difficult, and the structure behind it has to be a lot more clear. So as we kind of bring that back into the sort of the South Africa context, the other very important message is that demand is not slowing down. Europe has projected a 60% increase in electrification demand growth over the next 10 years because of the transport pivot, industrial pivot. And AI, as we heard this morning, is fundamental, and that is high baseload power, and it's getting more and more power hungry. So if we want to be a political player or a geopolitical player of any relevance, we have to have energy. It must be linked to industrial policy, and we are the only African country that has data centers and has any ability to play in the hyperscaling environment. If we're going to stay in that place and be relevant, we've got to be very practical and very business case driven around energy, which means we need everything. Now, when we talk about everything, suddenly we have multiple technologies. You've got a lot of digitization, variability, decentralized. Everyone can own. It's variable. And so from a technical platform perspective, the system operator needs visibility of who's going to do what the next day, and I need to hold them to account. You then need price discovery because you need price mechanisms. You need a capacity market because you can't put this all on the country balance sheet. The 50 cents that was announced yesterday out of bid window 7, that's not a sustainable price going forward. I think it's uniquely puts a huge investment risk and position on the country balance sheet, which everyone says is not going to be sustainable going forward. We also can't keep putting it on corporate balance sheets. So you must have a market that creates price discovery, that creates efficiency to, as Joanne said, when you start exposing inefficient generators, high-cost generators, there will be a commercial imperative that they fall out of the system. Then you have to deal with how do you take them out. If the private sector get overly bullish and overbuild renewables, well, they're going to have to pay the price because they won't be able to dispatch in the market. So the market has technical, financial, commercial, and structural benefits. The entire world has moved this way. All BRICS countries, there's no one who hasn't moved towards, at the very least, a wholesale market, if not a completely liberalized retail market. So you have to have a market if we're going to move forward. And the technical balance to that is the grid. And the whole world is struggling with grid. UK is trying to build more grid in the next 5 years than they've built in the last 30 years. So everyone is grid queuing, everyone has grid access concerns and problems, everyone is trying to rapidly build out grid. So we're not unique in either of these problems, but we are well behind. So we've got to be very focused and very practical around implementation on the market and on grid. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you very much. A stat that I heard recently, China's coal fleet has an energy availability factor, or should I say energy utilization factor, of lower than 50%. And it's not because the stuff's broken. It works very well. It's simply because they've also built even more renewables, and they've built it so that they can ramp certain of the stations, and they use it in a system that we only dream of at the moment. So it was an absolutely eye-opening. So I hear you, I see, and I want to add a question onto that when you respond. Battery minerals. Sorry. That was going to be for Shamini. Trade barriers and CBAM. If you can make your comments and then go to trade barriers.
All right. So I think just commenting on China, I think when we talk about the global market, and you've just said exactly what I was going to say, you know, China, India, they're building out a huge amount of renewables. They're still building coal. One of the projects that we've done through the Coal Industry Advisory Board is we looked at 2 projects that happened in India last year in carbon capture and storage. One of them has just been commissioned now. It's a 1.5 million ton per annum plant on a coal-fired power station, a new coal-fired power station. There's 2 gigawatts of coal-fired power, 8 gigawatts of renewables. It's a complex that they've built with 1.5 million tons of CCS going into deep saline aquifer storage. Start concept to commissioning took 3 years. They're now working on a 4 million ton per annum plant. Okay, and if anybody's going to make CCS work, it's going to be China. Yeah. So I think we can't underestimate what's happening in it's a complex system. As everybody's premier said, the transition is not about one or the other. It is a very complex system. When we look at build out of renewables, it's not just build out of renewables. What's happening in the other sectors? What's happening in terms of dispatchable energy? What's happening in terms of meeting the, supplementing your duck curve in terms of your renewable capacity and your renewables online? In terms of CBAM,
What the hell is CBAM? Come on, don't speak code.
It's a four-letter
Tell us what
acronym.
it
It's a
is.
four-
It's a
yeah.
four-letter swear word.
Carbon border adjustment mechanism.
And it's a very important part of why South Africa needs to decarbonize. And we need to look at the easy to decarbonize sector, which is obviously electricity, because that impacts everybody across the board. Anybody trying to export is going to be, especially into Europe, is going to be affected by CBAM. The trade barriers, I mean, to be honest, I can't comment on that very eloquently. So, but CBAM, we're not, from a coal perspective, Europe's not taking much coal. So,
No, excellent. You talked about...
Can I add
Go for it.
just a little bit? Europe doesn't take much coal, but it takes the vast
Goods.
proportion of our automotive
Yes.
exports. It takes the vast proportion of our agricultural export. It takes all kinds of other minerals, and it's starting to count how much carbon is in them.
Yeah.
And it's not only Europe. It is also the UK is developing its own system, and China is rolling out a carbon market that, as that carbon market becomes across the board, is going to start to have quite big impacts on us as well. So I don't think that we must see this as some kind of a Western thing. The Chinese are starting to take leadership in the carbon space. As the US and others have pulled back, China has pulled forward. And I think it's going to have very fundamental implications for us and where we see the future. And I think at the moment there's an opportunity space. And I think that we must grab that.
Yeah. I want to jump in on something.
do that, but then also if you could talk to me about battery minerals. Nikki spoke about balancing renewables, and people who call renewables intermittent have a conversation to have with me.
Okay.
Not that they're not variable, we get it. I mean, it's logical, but they don't disappear from something to nothing with no forecastability. Variable's the right word.
Yeah.
Intermittent is just not science. So, but we need massive batteries. And one of the guys earlier said batteries are for EVs only.
No, it wasn't me, it was Woesler.
No, it wasn't you. It wasn't you. Near Summers. No, I won't say that. Talk
Okay.
about minerals and your comment first.
Oh, okay. So I was just going to add, in terms of CBAM, you're quite right, Nikki. It's going to be one of the big drivers for why we diversify, because a lot of our markets are out there. It's in Europe. And we need to also accept that a lot of the affordability for the low carbon products that we want to start producing is in Europe. We need to be able to access that market to be able to develop our own, right? One of the things that is happening right now around CBAM is the offset market and the utilization of offsets to be able to offset your liability. So it's definitely something that we as a country need to be aggressively pursuing. Through the carbon tax, we've seen this developing, but it's nowhere near where it needs to be, not like China and not to play that active role. And this is also a huge opportunity for us in terms of Africa, regionalization, and building those projects across, and selling these credits across the border as well. So it's definitely a big option to consider. Critical minerals. We have a lot of critical minerals.
Opportunity.
It is the biggest opportunity we have. We have lost almost all of our beneficiation capabilities in
minute,
country.
just so you know.
Okay, and we need to be able to develop this more in the country. Getting back to tariffs, US tariffs don't apply to these critical minerals. Why? Because there's a market, they need it, right? So how exactly are we going to do things differently in country to be able to supply this so that we are not just extracted of these minerals and it goes elsewhere? So we need to do a lot more. National Critical Mineral Strategy, I'm trying to rush. National Critical Mineral Strategy was just put out. A lot more needs to be done, and we need to participate. Again, it requires the value chain to be looked at so that we collaborate not just with ourselves in the sector, but across that value chain. And we need to start looking at incentives and other opportunities to get business to come to the table in a meaningful way. Thank you.
Right.
Brian, can I quickly come in on the trade side? Quickly,
I want to come in with Alex for 30 seconds, then James, then we're going to close.
I'll give each one of them a minute. I'm in a good mood.
Oh, gee, such a concession, hey? Okay, 1 minute each.
I just wanted to say that, I mean, when it comes to the trade issue, I think decarbonizing our economy is absolutely essential for our economic competitiveness and trade. So, I mean, a recent global survey that was done, there were 104 South African executives that were polled in this global survey for various factors. And they basically said unequivocally that 95% of them believe that we should transition from fossil fuel-based electricity to renewable energy-based electricity. And the reason why they said that was they were worried about exports, they were worried about global economic competitiveness. So, I mean, certainly with the work we've done, we know also there are over 100 companies in South Africa that have already committed to 100% renewable electricity by 2050, if not sooner. And a lot of it is just market forces and market concerns. So, you know, if we can decarbonize the power sector, we can also create space for other parts of the economy, but we can also help protect a lot of our exports and our future economy. I think if we look at where the market is moving, the signals, the pricing, for us, you know, the decarbonizing the economy is definitely a trade issue. It will help us protect our industries. It will also encourage new forms of investment at the same time. So it's part of it's definitely a huge part of the economic argument.
James, did you want to make a closing comment?
Load shedding was taught us a lot. It made us very focused, and it was relatively easy to make decisions because you had this unifying crisis and everyone was like, good. Now we're in this very much more diverse, complicated environment. We've got to be much more mature, and we talk about lots of collaboration and all the opportunity. The reality is if we could deliver all of that, we would be in a 3-4% GDP growth environment, and that would be fantastic. So no one's debating the opportunity. However, we all know next year's local elections, then we've got ANC elections, then we've got national elections. So we're going into a difficult and uncertain political period. At the moment, investment is stalling. It's behind. TDP is behind. Renewables is behind. Gas power is behind.
Grid.
You pick it. We're not on track. So if we're currently not on track, and these things start to fall off because we go through 2 to 3 years of uncertainty, 2030 is going to be our next crisis, maybe a bit before. We will all have singular vision again, which might be good because we'll all take action. But ideally, we really want to avoid another crisis, which means we must start taking much more concerted effort around action. What must we do in the next 6 months, one year, maybe 18 months tops? But there are many things now. If we don't pin these down and really get them moving in the next 18 months, then I think, Bernard, we're going to have a problem in the next 2 to 3 years.
Thanks, James. That's a great close.
Despite my earlier comments that we don't only need engineers, since the engineers took over Eskom, there's implementation. So they do have their place, huh? These damn engineers.
Yeah, be nice, eh?
I'm going to ask this question to you, Brian, because you were so rude to me today, the whole day. There's a question about is there still sufficient runway for cost reductions in renewables? If not, can carbon credits, trading, wheeling, sale to grid play a role in reducing costs? Can we talk about cost of renewables? And I'll start with you. Because James made an important point that perhaps the last pricing point is no longer sustainable or economical. So what happened to this beautiful story that renewables was going to get cheaper forever? Now you are implementing it and it's not real anymore.
Yeah, so most of the answers to that would sound like excuses. But the reality is...
No, we've had many excuses from the coal miners this morning, so join us.
That storyline is completely misconstrued. Just because new generation capacity that's coming on can and will be cheaper than it would otherwise have been, doesn't mean the tariff is coming down. There are two fundamentally different things. There's a tariff trajectory, or there's a tariff trajectory with more renewables. That's what we've got to grapple with.
Can we talk about renewable costs, the renewable tariff? Is that going to now go up at the same rate as Eskom?
No, because you have defined, 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 you have defin escalation clauses in those tariffs. So let's look at what was announced yesterday. 1,200 and something megawatts, 6 projects. Congratulations, Red Rocket and their partners, Skatek and their partners. That 50 cents, what is it and what isn't it? Because people say that LCOE is a wrong metric.
You must just for us, LCOE.
Levelized cost of electricity. So it's the electricity cost of a technology as an input to a system cost. If you use LCOE to mean everything, then yes, it's bull dust. If you use it to understand what a technology can give you at the time it's producing, then it is science. So that's what 50 cents is. While the sun is shining and you've got a curve, and it's not just that bell curve anymore because it's trackers, so it's almost like a squarish curve. You've got electricity at that price. But you need storage. And we've got almost 3 gigawatts of pumped hydro storage in the country. And in fact, about 2 years ago on a big WhatsApp group that I'm part of, there was a statement made that the pump storage is not being used optimally. And there was a lot of pushback from the Eskom guys who were doing a damn good job within the constraints, using it close to perfectly, because the system operator is one of the best run entities, engineers, by the way. But the reality was there wasn't enough energy in the system to fully charge the pump storage, pump the water up for when it can be used. So that 50 cents, and part of what James's comment was, that's also the price with an 80% government guarantee. It used to be 100%, they brought it down to 80%. So the level of risk and uncertainty, that's important. Most of your private offtake is going to be closer to R1. And now, under the market, you're going to have what's called balanced responsible parties. You can't just give energy when it's available and stand back and do nothing more. So it's a lot more complex than just that. You're still talking at or below R1, and you're not exposed to forex escalation, rand dollar. So you've got a very defined, typically a power purchase agreement, another acronym, a 3-letter acronym this time, PPA, is typically a starting price and either a defined 4-5% escalation, or it's to indexed. But it's
in
known.
other words, tracking Eskom's inefficiency.
That's it.
Yeah. I want to move on. No, James. I want to move on to the ladies and localization and the collaboration. As a miner, I think we should not waste the remaining 30 years of coal mining at Emashleni. It will be criminal. But we are wasting it. And I'm not talking about just energy transition. I'm talking about we're not building a Johannesburg we forgot that it was a gold mining town. Are we more serious about collaboration? Because the SLP
Social and Labour
force us into it. So, I mean, when do we come together and say coal mining and Sasol should do 90% local procurement without government interference? Isn't that more achievable than some of these other big things we talk about? For us, can I start with Thungela and then put your non-Sasol hat on?
You're gonna
Speak
go
as
there.
an industry. No, but I mean, you are two players and through the industry.
Okay.
Are we doing enough?
At the moment, no. There's a lot of talk about collaboration, but there's not a lot of action. It's starting to happen. There are some collaborative projects starting to happen in the SLP space that Shamini spoke about. And to see more of those, I think would be brilliant. You know, water infrastructure, proper water infrastructure projects rather than putting in JoJo tags.
You are still on infrastructure. I actually think miners should do less government work. I'm talking about the procurement side. I'm talking about why don't we leave government to
The
government and we
municipalities'
actually
jobs.
do what we as miners should be doing? Can't we just procure smarter? Sorry to interrupt. The water is also important. But just on the procurement side, our spend, can't we change the economy through that?
Can I maybe jump in? So I completely agree with you. I think, Bernard, it is a huge opportunity, especially for the communities where we operate as well, to see how we can do things better in those communities. I'm going to put where I was, Cecil, a few years ago. I mean, just in terms of the renewables program that I was part of when I was there, was 40% requirement for localization. I mean, that's the things that we did ourselves internally, and companies are doing this. And I think just in terms of the overall sentiment at the moment, I think where the sector is at, just generally as the energy sector, the need for collaboration is now pressed upon us. I think it wasn't there before. We are all in a seriously difficult situation. There is a crisis at the moment, and I think we're feeling it. So these are the kinds of opportunities, and I think the small things are what matters, the procurement, things within your control and remit to change. And I think you're quite right, we need to start having those conversations about what we can do now, immediate action as opposed to looking at 10 years from now.
I can name 4 CEOs who, if they get together and take a decision and instruct the right people.
Exactly.
And this is Eskom and Sasol and the 2 larger coal mining companies, and the whole region will be different.
100%.
I think this is the implementation step that you talk about. Joanne, you want to comment? You look like you want to comment.
No, I like this.
Okay.
It's music to my ears.
Yeah, but nothing happens.
You know, we spend a lot of time in South Africa waiting for someone else. I think the time has come where if you have some power, take your power and move with it, is what I would suggest. I think it'll move us forward very fast.
And you'll get followers, right?
Between Brian and I, we've taken up all that time. This was a fantastic conversation. I do agree with you. We are no longer, we are no longer talking as if we are different worlds. We're talking as if we are different parts of the same economy. I think for me the most profound point is, if this economy grows, 90% of these problems go away. Everything we do should be measured against, is the benefit of social transformation, of BEE, of supported tariffs, does it help the economy grow or not? We need to be bold and say, come on, 1% economic growth, there's poverty and inequality. But that's me, the capitalist. Economic growth will help us to achieve some of these things. Ladies, gentlemen, let's get rid of this panel.
Gentlemen and ladies.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex.
All right.